Hello, government students. Today we're going to be talking about some of the closest advisors to the President of the United States. We're going to be talking about an organization called the Executive Office of the President. Actually, this is kind of an umbrella organization that includes lots of different organizations within that larger category of executive office. Some of the people that we're talking about today will actually work over here in this section just to the western part of the White House. This is called the West Wing of the White House. A lot of them will also work to the across the street from the West Wing over here in the Executive Office Building. It's a huge building full of a lot of people that work for the President of the United States. To the right of the White House over here, you see the East Wing. Well, we won't be talking about these folks too much today. These people are actually working predominantly for the First Lady. The First Lady's staff is there. And a lot of the tours of the White House that you can take as a tourist will begin in the East Wing. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started on the Executive Office of the President. So the Executive Office of the President includes several organizations, including the White House office, which is his personal staff, the President's personal staff. There's a lot of people on the President's staff, but I would like you to remember two of them, and two of them by name. When I show you a photograph of someone in this presentation, you should take note of their name. All righty. First of all, the President's Chief of Staff is a man named Jeff Zients, and he manages the operations of the White House. This is a cabinet level position. So when the President has a cabinet meeting with the Secretary of State and Commerce and all those secretarial positions, the Chief of Staff will be there as well, and that would be considered at the same level of prestige as any cabinet minister. So I want you to remember Jeff Zients, the Chief of Staff. He's truly the President's closest advisor and works in the West Wing near the President's Oval Office. There's also an office called the White House Counsel. I'm not going to have you memorize that person's name, but he's the legal advisor to the President. And I want to stress that the White House Counsel is the legal advisor to the President in his role as President of the United States. He is not the legal counsel for the President on a personal basis. So if the President were to get in some kind of legal trouble, he would have to have a private counsel to represent him, a private lawyer. But the White House Counsel helps the President on legal matters. For example, if the President wanted to put together a program which, for example, would take away some of the college debt of students, which President Biden is trying to do, the White House Counsel will be the person who manages the legal process there and helps the President determine whether or not such a program would in fact be constitutional and legal. The next big organization within the Executive Office of the President is the National Security Council. And the National Security Council is composed of about 6 very high-level advisors to the President, and I have them listed there. Jake Sullivan is the National Security Advisor. You should take note of his name. He's been in national security roles for quite some time, going all the way back to early years of the Obama administration. So within the National Security Council, of course, you have the National Security Advisor, who's the head of the council, and then you have these other positions which have other roles within our government as well. But these are the positions that are considered of absolute, vital importance to our national security. So the Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who is the top military guy in the United States, and the Director of National Intelligence are all in the National Security Council. And they deal with obviously very, very serious matters relating to our nation's security. Here's a famous picture of the National Security Council meeting during the Obama administration. This is in the Situation Room in the White House, and this was taken as Osama bin Laden was being killed, basically, during the raid on the Osama bin Laden compound in Pakistan. And these members of the National Security Council are watching a live satellite feed of that raid, and which led to the ultimate death of Osama bin Laden, who was responsible for the 9/11 terrorist attack back in 2001. Okay, next up we have the Office of Management and Budget. This is also a part of the Executive Office of the President. And the OMB is the abbreviation. They prepare the national budget and submit it to Congress each year. It's the largest unit of the White House Executive Office. Many of these folks work in that gigantic Executive Office building, which is just to the west of the White House. And the director of the OMB is, like any other cabinet member, someone who must be approved by the Senate. The OMB is similar in some ways to the Congressional Budget Office. However, the OMB probably is a little bit more partisan in its reports, trying to maybe flavor reports a little bit in such a way that it makes the president look good. Whereas the OMB, I think, is totally the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, is totally nonpartisan. That's not to denigrate OMB at all. These are very, very good employees who do a great job of putting together our national budget each year, determining what we're going to spend those trillions of dollars of tax money on. We're going to talk about several other parts of the executive office, first of which is the National Drug Control Policy Office. They are a part of the War on Drugs. This was created in 1988, and they basically coordinate the activities of a lot of different law enforcement organizations to try to fight illegal narcotics in our country. We also have the Council for Domestic Policy. Kind of like the National Security Council, this includes various cabinet members and department heads who are involved in domestic policy issues, and they get together frequently to help coordinate the activities of their various departments on domestic policy. We have the Council of Economic Advisors, which I believe was mentioned in our economics class last semester. This is a group of 3 of our top economists in the United States. Usually these are academics who are in some of the top economics programs in universities in the United States. They take a leave of absence from their university to serve on the President's Council of Economic Advisors. And they provide Congress an annual economic report to help Congress understand the status of our economy in the country. And we have the U.S. Trade Representative, who coordinates and enforces the trade agreements that we have with other nation states. A very important role, especially in this era of globalization of the economy. This is a very important role, working out trade agreements and ensuring that other nation states are actually abiding with the agreements that we make with them. Okay. So there are other positions within the executive office. I just wanted to cover some of these more important ones. We covered about half of them, but wanted you to get those in your notes. There are some other important cabinet level positions I want you to be aware of. The Director of National Intelligence is a new position that was put in place after the 9/11 attacks. And in the 9/11 attacks, it was determined that the FBI and CIA and National Security Administration, these organizations all involved in intelligence gathering, did not coordinate or communicate with each other. And had they done a better job of communicating with each other, we may have been able to prevent that terrorist attack on 9/11/2001. So the Director of National Intelligence was created as a position. And that position is then to coordinate the intelligence gathering of various organizations within our national security operations and make sure that these organizations are communicating with each other. The EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency, is a very important agency to help improve our nation's environment. I will tell you that right now our environment is much, much cleaner, much less pollution in America than there was when I was your age, and much of that can be attributed to the EPA. Then we have the UN ambassador. The UN ambassador's role is involved in multilateral diplomacy. That means diplomacy involving many countries at one time on a particular issue. That obviously the UN ambassador works through the United Nations. In some ways, the role of the UN ambassador is similar to that of the Secretary of State. But the UN ambassador is involved in multilateral diplomacy using the United Nations as its medium, whereas the Secretary of State is involved typically in more unilateral diplomacy, one-on-one diplomacy with other countries, as opposed to multilateral, working with many countries at one time. And another very important organization is the Small Business Administration, which assists small businesses on legal matters. They assist with providing loans in the event of a disaster, a natural disaster. The Small Business Administration will help with disaster recovery efforts for small businesses. Small businesses do not have the resources of a huge corporation, so smaller businesses will oftentimes need to depend on the advice that they can get from the Small Business Administration on legal matters and getting loans, that sort of thing, which would not be such a difficult task for a large corporation. Okay, finally, I want to talk about the civil service. The positions that we've been talking about up to now are positions which have heads of the agencies who are typically appointed by the president. The civil service represents all the federal employees who typically work in these organizations. These are regular employees who were not appointed to their position. They were appointed because of their skills, because they are professionals in the area that they need to be working in. So in the you'd have people in the White House Executive Office building who are accountants, who are experts, scientists and that sort of thing in various areas that the government needs to rely on. So that's the civil service. They are not appointed, they're hired because of their skills. Sometimes the civil service is referred to as the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy, when we use that term, it tends to have a negative connotation. But basically, if I call someone a bureaucrat, typically they don't think of that as a compliment. They would rather be called a civil servant. But it's the same thing. Bureaucracy and civil service, bureaucrat and civil servant, basically the same thing, but one is a little more derogatory than the other. Originally, the civil service was very, very small, but it grew quite rapidly, and by the 1820s, there were about 20,000 people in the civil service. Today, there's far more than that. We're well up into the millions today. I want to finish up by talking about how the civil service has evolved through the years, and we have to talk about Andrew Jackson and the spoils system in this subject. In 1829, Jackson was president. He was actually beginning his second term, I believe. And no, this was his first term, excuse me. And he fired 2,200 government employees, 2,200 civil servants. And he replaced them with people who were loyal to him, party loyalists. And this is called the spoils system, where you provide government jobs to your political supporters. This means that you're providing work to people not because of their skills, but because they're loyal to you, the president, or whatever the office is that is awarding the jobs. So the spoils system is not a good way of hiring people. It tends to not look at their skills, but look at loyalty to the president, which, okay, that may be important, but that shouldn't be the number one driver of getting a job. The civil service was eventually reformed. The spoils system lasted for a long, long time, but it did get reformed, and the reform movement began in 1881 after President Garfield was assassinated, the second president to lose his job and be assassinated by assassination. Garfield was assassinated by a disgruntled civil servant, someone who was trying to get a job working for the president in the civil service. He didn't get the job, and in anger, he shot and killed the president. So this starts a movement to reform that spoils system. The movement was rather slow. It did achieve some results, but it was not until nearly 100 years later when true reforms came about, and that was during the presidency of Jimmy Carter. And Carter should be lauded for this. He made major reforms in the civil service, introducing something called the merit system. And here, federal employees must pass a test proving their job qualifications, and it is not an easy test. And it takes basically involving almost any kind of federal job, even something like being a mail carrier. You must prove that you have the ability to do the job through the merit system. Federal employees cannot be party activists, and federal employees cannot go on strike. So the party activist thing helps to ensure that you're hiring people based on their merit and not on their loyalty to the party or to the president. And federal employees cannot go on strike. They can join a union, but they cannot strike. And if they go on strike, they can be fired. They have to do their job and do it in a professional way. And with that, we're going to close this presentation. And as usual, be sure to always check Canvas and make sure that there are no assignments. And if there is an assignment, make sure you do it. You guys have a great day.